don't know if guys is gender neutral anymore, but I should say respected guests. Thank you for being here. And I have known each of you by reputation or by the work that you've done in the paths that we've crossed and some of the projects we may have been involved in. And I feel like I'm in a funny position being here as a male host talking about Indigenous women's leadership. But the reason why I feel awkward about that is because I think that the real voice of our Indigenous communities comes from the women. The women are the hearts of our nation, and that's something that I've been taught about. My grandfather told me something when I was 14 years old, Frank Cardinal. He said, when you become a man, he said, if you want to become a warrior, he said, it will be a woman who teaches you how to be a warrior. Now, at 14 years old, of course, I didn't understand that. I just smiled a lot. But now looking back on that wisdom, it really has resonated with me pretty much throughout my life. Because when I do work, I always turn to the women first to get their counsel and their guidance and their direction in the projects that I do. And I know today, as Indigenous men and the roles that we're trying to recapture in terms of our traditions of being Indigenous men in this society, we will have to turn. And I think, we are looking in the direction towards our women to remind us of where we're at and what roles that we play. But leadership is in itself something that has many different meanings and can look different from a male point of view. But so the first question that I have for you all is leadership. When you and I know, Dr. Voyageur, that you've done some considerable work in this field, and maybe we'll start with you in regards about leadership. And when we talk about Indigenous leadership and we talk about Indigenous women's leadership, what would that really look like, or what did it look like historically, and what does it look like contemporarily now?
Well, I teach the Indigenous Women in Leadership program at the Banff Centre, and I've been involved there for the past 15 years. And what we believe as part of the definition is that leadership is a verb, mm-hmm. that it is the action of leading. And there is a huge responsibility on you to do the right thing by the people that you lead. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting that people can go into leadership for a number of different reasons, and of course there's lots of considerations that you have to place, that you have to take into account when you decide that you're going to go into leadership. Mm-hmm. But in our communities, women are responsible for a great number of things, and cultural transmission, having the children, bearing the children, but also teaching the children and socializing the children to the rules, what's expected of them as an individual, and the spiritual teachings and those types of things. And an important role for women as well is to watch the children and see the ones that they believe have leadership qualities. Yes. So that's
and that part of it. That makes a lot of sense. And reflecting on my grandfather's teachings, he always shared with me that if you really want to know where your community is at, go to the women. Because as you were saying, they have a lot of responsibilities. They're looking after the young ones, they're looking after elders, they're also looking after somewhat of the social environment within a First Nations community. So it's something to always keep in mind. And for you, Elder Scalp Lock, from your traditions, how was Indigenous women's leadership seen?
I was on the Siksika Nation Chief and Council for 18 years, and I was approached by the women along with our former chief, Strader Crowfoot, mm-hmm. and of course my grandmother, the late Margaret Badboy, mm-hmm. and my grandma watched me. She knew that I had a problem with alcohol, mm-hmm. And she was always behind me, her support, and she told me that at some point in time I'll be, elected,
Yeah.
and that I finally found myself. And she was always hoping that one day I would sober up and do something, because she knew that I had something, but she didn't understand why I drank.
Mm-hmm.
I really had to clean up my act, did a lot of, healing, and today I'm sober 44 years. And I knew my grandma was with me, the late Margaret Bad Boy. She was always with me. And then she told me when I got elected, she said, now you're walking with Siksika. You're going to be up in the forefront. Really look after Siksika. Look at the whole of Siksika. Don't have special groups. Don't favor any group. You're there to represent the whole of Siksika. And I always have that compassion. You're there for them. And Strader was really supportive, especially when I was working on Awutan Shelter in Calgary. He was one of the leaders of 3 to 7 that really supported me. And then I moved home, and Strader was the chief, and he gave us the old band office to open a center for the prevention of family and domestic violence.
Yes.
So he really understood and recognized what I've been doing for our women, children, and men.
Yes.
And he always felt it was important to be supported by our chief and council. And he always told me, never mind about the denial, just keep going.
Yes.
So my grandma gave me the name Autanaki,
Yeah.
Shield Woman. Her and her late husband were transferred the Shield bundle back in the 30s. She didn't remember what year it was, and she had so many grandchildren. Why me of all her grandchildren?
Yeah.
I asked her, and she said, well, you're doing something good about your life. You make sure you dress well, make sure you speak well, and represent your people with pride and respect.
Yes.
Because we look up to you.
Yeah.
And your name, my girl, she said, Guguna, the shield is going to protect you in your work. Nothing will hit you. And we're going to call the shelter, because she was at the opening of Awutan Shelter,
Yes.
March the 10th, 1993. And it was her 100th year birthday.
Yeah.
Oh, that was really something. And so we had the opening, we had, the ceremonies, the elders were there, and that's how come the shelter is called the Awutan Shelter.
Yes.
The spiritual meaning, it's so sacred.
Yes.
So she gave me everything, my grandma, and she always told me that she's proud of me. And I spoke at her 100th year birthday, and again I was questioning, why me? And then one day she told me, she said, shh, don't say anything. You're my most special granddaughter. She didn't want me to tell the rest of the family. But anyway, and when I think back, what she taught me, like to respect my husband,
Yes.
to respect the men folk, to really work with our people. And then the center, we started Kamudani Center. In Blackfoot, it means we're starting a new life.
Yes.
And of course, the men folk in Siksika were making fun of it.
Yeah.
And she told me, never mind, because I used to have the elders come. We did a lot of training, a lot of healing. We had walks, violence against women, but a lot of the men came out to support us. And they used to make fun of my husband at the band office at the mall. I can't even give Ruth a dirty look anymore. She runs to Ruth's Scalp. She takes her away to a shelter. But my husband, understood, recognized, and whatnot. And my grandma told me, don't let these things get to you. Just keep walking. Don't put your head this way or that way. Especially, your word comes from the heart.
Yes.
Just keep going. And things are going to get better.
Yes.
On our nation and whatnot. And so I always think back. She even gave me my teepee, the design, the shield design. We did all these things before she passed away. And I've got this teepee, and she said, I made a house for you. Ralph Klein came down when we had our commemoration, and one of my granddaughters went up to Ralph, because Ralph was my traditional brother. We were raised by the same elder in Siksika, traditionally. And Dana explained everything to Ralph about the teepee design.
Yes.
And she even brought Ralph to the teepee, and they were in the teepee. So everything, what my grandma taught me, to respect myself and not to go back to drinking, and that I've got this potential to help our people. And I ran in the Little Boba election around that same time, I think it was 1993, and I represented the New Democrats.
Oh, is that right?
Oh, it was a scary experience. I ran against prejudice, discrimination at these forums in southern Alberta. But of course, my grandma was with me. This was before she passed away. And I always went to her and asked her for support. Oh, you're going to do okay and whatnot. Don't let these people get to you, especially if you know what you're doing.
Yes.
Like in Blackfoot, she would really preach to me, lecture me. If you really believe in what you do, if it's coming from here, everything is going to be okay.
Well, you're really presenting a lot of characteristics that I see in Indigenous women's leader.
Yeah.
One is strength and courage. I mean, it takes a lot, as you mentioned, running for a mainstream political party in a community that maybe is not really welcoming of Indigenous people, let alone Indigenous women. I see that, these kind of characteristics are foundational in the kind of leadership that Indigenous women are carrying out for our communities. And I want to ask you, and the question is open for you too as well, is knowing the work that you do in the communities and many other communities as well, can you tell me about what Indigenous woman was one of your leader heroes in growing up?
Well, definitely my aunt, Chief Dorothy McDonald of Fort Mackay, because growing up, my mother was very pained and troubled and traumatized and broken. I was dropped off to my Auntie Dorothy and my Uncle Rod's a lot growing up. So when she was taking the government and the oil companies to court, I was watching this as a young little child, and then to see her be successful and to see everyone celebrate that success that affected the country and protective rights for communities. She also had a few other women on that team as well. I believe Linda Duncan was involved as well, for them to, just be this small little team and take on these people that are, trying to build a relationship while, our community is being surrounded by industry. Well, they had they had a fight on their hands.
Yes.
And who better to do that than my aunt? And yeah, she worked really, really hard with what little that they had. And to come out like that and to be celebrated, even to this day,
Yes.
at the Esquio Awards, they have the
Yes.
award dedicated to her at the end of the evening. It's just, and then after my mother was murdered, she took on that role of mother even stronger. And she's the wind at my back. I've always felt someone behind me, someone over me. I do believe my mother is there and protecting me, probably knowing everything that she knows now, and being someone who's probably healed and watching over me. But I do believe these two women protected me.
Yes.
But my aunt is growing up to watch her as I was going into my own life and story. Those two women are a big part of my story. And so they have inspired me and guided me since I was just a little girl.
Yes.
So I had this potential and quality that I did not recognize until other people told me, share your story,
Yes.
start speaking. And when I saw my story and how it affected other people, that's when I really started moving forward. And I take on their knowledge and their fight, and I honor that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, we all know that the colonial history around Indigenous women in leadership has been one of total suppression and really obliteration in so many ways. So I ask you, Dr. Voyageur, because you've written about this and you've done a lot of good work in this area, about today. Are we seeing a rise in leadership from Indigenous women?
Yes. It's in so many different areas. I mean, I've done work on reserve politics, and prior to 1951 changes to the Indian Act, women could not run for office and they could not vote. So, and actually, we didn't get the universal franchise until 1960. So, we hear all about the famous five and, the person's case and all of this kind of thing, and it didn't seem to matter to them that their Indigenous sisters weren't persons.
Yes.
And that we didn't have the vote and that kind of thing. So, again, speaks to issues around racism.
Yeah.
But, in the universities, we find that there are definitely more Indigenous women in universities. In fact, compared to Indigenous men, we have 3 times more women with university degrees than men.
Yes.
That's right. They are starting to, come into leadership roles.
Yep.
And it's really interesting because, there have been so many changes over the years. And I'm not to say that there aren't issues that have to be solved, because there are.
Yes.
But things are so much better than they used to be.
Yes.
At one time in our history, if you got a university degree, you lost your Indian status. So you couldn't be an Indian. You couldn't be an educated Indian.
Yeah.
And so with that, we're seeing women leading, in the communities and whatnot. And actually, I did some research a couple of years ago with a status of women, looking at women in the boardroom. And with the Catalyst report that came out, they were looking at a goal of 15%. In our community, some of our boards are entirely women. So women are taking care of business in the Indigenous community, but also outside of the community as well. You're starting to see more women in leadership roles, in government, in politics, in business. I did research a number of years ago on Indigenous women entrepreneurs in Alberta, and the data there were fascinating.
Yes.
I interviewed 50 Indigenous women. The women that I interviewed made 3 times more per the year before than women, Indigenous women in general.
Yeah.
And the highest paid woman that I interviewed made $3.1 million the year before.
Wow. That is
And
incredible.
all of these women started, all of them but one, started their business from scratch, and not one of them took a penny from the government. So they were all self-funded.
That is amazing.
So anyway, there are all kinds of great things going on in the Indigenous community, but we only hear about the negative things that make it on the news, and in some regards the media is the problem.
Yes.
In that they only focus on things that are negative. And if we were to look at Indigenous women, like murdered and missing women, and these two ladies know much more about it than I do. But in the research that I've done, what we find, for example, Brenda Gilchrist says that when an Indigenous woman goes missing, they talk about her as being a sex worker or a transient, living a transient lifestyle and whatnot. However, if a non-Indigenous woman goes missing, they talk about her as being, a very beloved family member, and how she had a hobby and how she had aspirations
Yes.
for the future and whatnot. Whereas with Indigenous women, they never mention that.
Yes.
Like, we're not beloved and we have no aspirations for our future.
Yes.
So again, we're seeing
Yeah.
very different portrayals of Indigenous people in general, but specifically Indigenous women.
Yeah.
I've been asked by families to come to their court appearances by different families around Alberta, even Saskatchewan. And it seems to be, you're absolutely correct, because I see that firsthand. A lot of the media comes when it's just really bad, and the person's already gone and already portrayed in a negative way. And then all of a sudden I got a phone call from Onion Lake, Saskatchewan, for the Heathen and the Hunt families, who the Saskatchewan RCMP did do a Big Brother operation of $4 million, and they convicted this man of killing these two women from Onion Lake, Saskatchewan, and it was a big investigation. So when they came to Edmonton for sentencing, I was asked to be there. I contacted all the media. 2 cameras showed up for this historical sentencing of a man and RCMP who actually valued the life of these 2 women, and I thought that it should have been everywhere.
Yes.
To give us even some positive and some hope of some kind.
That was the fellow in Red Deer, from Red Deer. Yeah.
And so I was there firsthand and seen it. So yes, there's a lot to do, and we're still facing racism. And to go into women leadership, what makes maybe us even more determined and more strong is we have to overcome trauma, we have to overcome racism, we have to overcome lateral violence, we have to overcome maybe not a non-supportive husband, maybe not a supportive men in our homes and other people and relatives and family. We have to overcome so much just to get where we are, and that, I think, drives us and gives us even more of strength, because we have to overcome that much more than a lot of the other women, and why we are so reported in everything. We're so high in everything that is awful in this country. Well, we're starting to get educated. We're starting to get untraumatized. We're starting to get healing. We are, judges and lawyers and doctors, and so we're that driving force. But like I said, I just find it the strength admirable, because we have to overcome so much more.
Yes, absolutely. And one question I want to pose to you, Elder Scalp Lock, is when you see these young women coming up and you see their potential as leaders or providing a leadership role model, what type of support should we as a community be giving to these young leaders?
I have been doing a group, and the model, it's called Strengthening the Spirit.
Mm-hmm.
I did 18 groups in Siksika, and I worked with our women, not just the young women, different age groups.
Yeah.
And in our Siksika culture, our elders said, your spirit was broken. Your spirit was taken away when you were at the residential school. and all the violence, family and domestic issues on the reserve, we've lost our spirit. And it's a process that I've been helping these women to find their spirit.
Yes.
And the groups, like I have two evenings a week for 16 weeks. Like I teach them skills. There's a healing component to it. And sometimes, like we start at 5 in the evening till 10, 11 at night. And I always feel that these feelings have to be taken care of. I focus on feelings, behavior, and attitude, especially how women are treated, like what she's been talking about. I really see it too, even in my own home community, how they like to put us down.
Yes.
And some of these girls that were in that group have gone back to school, some are working, and some girls have gone back to college in Siksika at Olson. There was 2 young women graduated from University of Lethbridge. One, she got her psychology degree. She came back. She's working at Siksika now. And I always tell these young women, the women too, older women, you have so much potential. You deserve everything, every good thing in life.
Yeah.
And us women, in a lot of the cases, a lot of our women have always been the first ones to step out of that family or domestic situation or alcohol background. And a lot of these women were the ones that reached out.
That's right.
Yeah, so I like to be there to support them, and I always tell them, I believe in you,
Yes.
but you have to believe in yourself that you can do it.
You bring up a really good point, and there's been some, I guess we can call it informal leadership, but leadership nonetheless by Indigenous women that has gone on to really fundamentally change how Indigenous people work within urban centers, for example. The formation of the Canadian Native Friendship Centers were largely started by Indigenous women within urban centers to provide support and networking within an urban population. And Indian control of education coming out of the sit-ins in Saddle Lake, that was led by Indigenous women at the time. And so, and you've done a lot of research in this area, Dr. Voyageur. What did you see when you were looking at the leaders that you were studying in terms of what were some of the most notable forms of support for them?
Well, it's interesting because Alberta has been a real hotbed of activism and movement in the women's movement. Back in the 70s, the Voice of Alberta Native Women,
Nice.
And my mother was part of that. And actually, I was a teenager when I first got dragged off to a Van W's meeting, and I lived in Hinton, and there was a very active group there that did all kinds of work in the community.
Yeah.
They ran bingos and other events, and actually they were able to save enough money to buy a building and had a hall.
Yes.
So the Native Women's Hall in Hinton, and there was all types of programs that were being run there and whatnot. So there are things that have been going on for quite some time, and of course Indian Rights for Indian Women.
Yes.
The
That's right.
group of women from here
Yes.
in Alberta, Nellie Carlson, the late Jenny Margetts.
That's
What was her name? Joan Collins. Kay Anderson.
Yes.
So all of those women, from here in Alberta, and just really fearless.
Yes.
Little Nellie Carlson taking on, Pierre Elliott Trudeau.
Yes, that's right.
And so, those types of things.
That's the kind of
happen.
history that we have to refer to for future generations, because the men always get the sunshine, in terms of, these victorious political battles, but really that could not have happened without the women putting their effort in behind it as well, and leading, their own voice and their own charge.
Actually, I had a graduate student, Sarah Carter and I co-supervised a graduate student, Corinne George, who actually did her master's thesis on grassroots movements in the Indigenous community in Alberta.
Yes.
So anyway, it was a fabulous piece of work.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah.
Those are the kind of resources that the Alberta Council for Women's Shelters need to have.
Yes.
As you know, there's the population on average across the province of all women's shelters contain about 55% on average of the clientele within each of these centers.
Yeah.
And the ACWS really is trying to create a support system for these Indigenous women. What can they do better to support those people?
I think that, just going back in history a little bit, I was part of a steering committee that got the Yellowhead Emergency Shelter started in Hinton in the mid-1980s. So we worked for a number of years, and being in a small town, certainly had its challenges, because everybody knew who you were, and everyone had a comment for you in the grocery store and all of that kind of thing. But we persevered. There was a core of us, and we were able to get this very very needed resource in the community, and many of the women that stay in this shelter are Indigenous women.
Yes.
So that's something that I'm very proud of.
Yes.
And the fact that this was 35 years ago.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
I think it's really important to go to the healing lodges like Awatan, and the others in the south. We don't have too many over here. We don't hardly have anything over here in this part. So I really think going down to go to the table with the healing lodges, go with the leaders there, build that relationship, find out how you can support them, because you have to talk to the people on the ground, the grassroots organizations. They have all the information that you really need, but there are obstacles, though. There is racism. There are things put in the way sometimes that doesn't build such a healthy relationship. So first off, there needs to be a new foundation, a clean slate. Now that I've heard about this program that they're trying to build here, that's a foundation. That's a foundation to build from. But I really think contacting them, talking to them and their experience, and their women and their children, and finding out how you can support that. And if you have better routes to funding, please give that to them. Please help them find this monies that they need, because a lot of the time we find in these organizations we have to struggle, and when we have such valuable information, it should be protected, it should be honored, and it should be respected as so.
I'll leave this final response to you before we go to questions, because I know we have some questions from our listeners. But what advice can you give to these shelters who work with Indigenous women? How can they better support them?
I really feel there need to be support, like what she was talking about. My experience with working on Awutan shelter, it took 8 years. It was very frustrating. There were many times I felt like giving up. I would leave the project maybe a month, couple months, and the late Nelson Gutnick, he was a former professor at University of Calgary. He really helped me. I seen Nelson in a vision. I was working at a shelter in Calgary. They didn't really accommodate our women. I'll give you one example. That one night I was coming to work, night shift. When I got to the shelter, the counselors were all talking and they were all anxious. I went into the intake room and I asked them, like, what's going on here? Can you tell me, like, what's the problem? Because I just felt something negative. And, I think this woman, we might have to tell her to move out. I think she's smoking dope in her room. And I kind of chuckled. And I knew she must have been burning sweetgrass. So I went down with that one counselor. Sure enough, this woman was smudging sweetgrass in her room and whatnot. And I laughed and I told that one counselor, these are the things I keep telling you. You don't communicate with our women right away. They had a little black book, and they used to put our women in the black book, like blacklist them, and they would ask them to leave. I was so upset. I told her, you counselors need to be educated. You have to have that awareness. Spirituality, it's so important to us. And so they ended up not kicking her out. I was so mad. And but anyway, there were so many examples, and I kept documenting all the experiences. And that one, when I had that vision about late Nelson Gutnick, in my vision, I visioned this man. He was walking down the road with me. He had a long beard, white hair, long hair. And he was holding my hand. We were walking down the road. And he looked at me and he said, my girl, don't give up. Your shelter will be reality. And this is when I started working on it. I kept track of documentation, stats, and whatnot. And he said, you'll have your shelter. And right away, I didn't know it was Nelson's spirit that was walking with me till later. And then we had to do a needs assessment in Calgary. The funding came from Secretary of State. Of course, when it comes to funding from the government, you have to have stats, whatnot, all these different things they ask for, and it was frustrating. But when you believe something in here, like right now, I'm experiencing my grandma's spirit. Right this moment. Yeah. And that's what Nelson told me. It's going to be a reality. When you believe something in your heart, 8 years I could have said, the heck with it. But it was for the benefit of our women. My late sister was killed August 1917, Sixikan. I had so many friends, families that were murdered, that went missing. But I made that commitment, that conviction, when I sobered up 44 years ago, that I'm going to help people, regardless. And all the time I have to keep going back and in my heart find out, am I still doing that work for our women, our children, our people? So that's how come, I give so much thanks to the Creator. I'm 74. I still can help people who are in need of help. And I feel so much better acknowledging my grandma's spirit because she's with me every day.
I appreciate you for sharing that vision with us. And there's a lot of work and support that many people will get from you, and I hope you find a way to get that support.
Because I always pray to my grandma, especially this morning, asking her, can you please be with me? I'm going to this very important meeting. Please be with me, Grandma. So she's here with me. I feel so much better sharing. But when you believe in something, when I worked on shelter all those 8 years, I never got paid 1 red penny.
Mm.
And I had to have a full-time job. I got my little granddaughter out of foster care, and I felt guilty when I was getting paid foster care payments, because in my traditional way, why should I get paid for looking after my granddaughter? So I went to court, and Judge Mandaman was the judge at Siksika, and I applied for private guardianship, I think that's what you call it.
Yeah.
I told the judge, I want to get her out of the system. I don't want to lose my girl in a foster care system.
Yes.
Because when I pulled her out of that home in Calgary, I have those pictures. This white lady never really fed her food.
Mm-hmm.
All she gave her was apple juice. My girl was just thin and frail.
Yeah.
So Ma was glad I got her out of the system. She wasn't in foster care that long. And I felt so much better. Judge Mandaman really supported my idea to get this private guardianship. So I fought, the system all the way till I got her out of there. Because I just knew. When she's 18 years old, they're going to kick her out of the house. And 18 years old, she's not going to have nothing, no culture, whatever. Now's the time to get her out when she was still a baby.
Yes.
So I really believe that we can do it. We can help these women to take custody of their kids and whatnot. Because when I was with child welfare, I always went out to look for our women, made sure that they went to court. And because my supervisor, he's my co-author, he always told me, Ruth, go out and look for them. And I went in Calgary downtown, had picnic with my people, and I had so much fun with them. All the jokes. And I used to tell them, don't feel bad. This was my playground long time ago. This is where I used to drink. So I had that real good relationship with them, and so I was always there to help our people, regardless of what they're going through. Because I believe in them. It's just that they need that support and somebody to believe in them. But anyway, I just wanted to share the importance of, having a vision and what my purpose is in this life, to continue to help our women.
Yes.
Yeah. So thank you.
I think it's really important to involve our men and boys, because they get left out of a lot of the healing, a lot of the conferences. I see a lot of women and girls coming to everything that I go and speak at, and I don't see hardly any men and boys. So I've been getting a lot of phone calls from struggling men and struggling teenagers, and they want me to help start something. So I'm going to start a support group for them, because they know what they're doing is wrong. They know that jail ain't helping it. There's no healing or programs in there. Not much of any that I've heard of. Hopefully that will change, because they need healing too. Just jail is not solving anything for any of our people. We need more healing lodges. We just need more counseling and more healing, period, for the trauma that our people have suffered. That I think that Canada does owe every Indigenous person some kind of healing or counseling of some sort. And so moving on from that, I think the men and boys need their space to go to as well. I went to City Hall and I asked for some pamphlets and some information of support groups for men. There were 2 pamphlets. That's it. There was nothing. So that's something I'm moving ahead on by myself, independently, with my own money, and help from some Indigenous men and teenagers in the community that want it. So I think that they need the help and healing too.
Yeah. All right. Did you want to say anything to close this out before we get to the questions?
No, I'm good to
All right.
the questions.
Well, thank you so much for that. Let's go to the questions.
First off, thank you so much. That was a wonderful conversation, and I have a lot of gems and taking a lot of notes. So one of my questions was, Elder Ruth, you were talking about your grandmother and how you said that she watched you and she knew, she could kind of see inside you, and in terms of recognizing your gifts and giving you a name and being present for and recognizing all the good work that you were doing, seemed like a different way of potentially being a leader than what we would consider in Western society as the person at the front of the line. So in terms of that kind of style and approach to leadership, what do you think is one thing, or it doesn't have to just be one thing, that maybe shelter leaders can learn about being a leader, to potentially, if they have Indigenous women that work in their organizations, to develop them and give them kind of some ownership within those organizations, and also the Indigenous women that access their services? What's something that they can learn from that example?
I really feel like in a shelter to really work with them, because there's been times they did not really fulfill the needs of these women, because some have talked to me. There need to be, like, they're in a shelter sometimes for a month, or they have an extension. They have enough time to really work with these women. I know they do a lot of work, but the healing component to it, there need to be a lot of healing with the elders, because some of them, when they leave, they're very scared. They still have that fear. But really, they should be working with them right in the shelter. They have the facility. If they have the elders that come and help them, those things have to be really worked on to really help them. And I always believe you have to work with these individuals. It's just like a little kid starting to walk. You don't just let them start on their own. You have to work with them. And sometimes it takes a long time. And then to have like outreach programs where they can come back and go to these outreach programs, for that continuity has to take place. Because it takes a long time to really feel good, to feel to feel that you can do it, to have that courage. But that spiritual part of it has to be there all the time. And to go to these ceremonies. Because I'll be going to a ceremony in Calgary on the 15th in the evening. So I always go to these ceremonies, and also to give them information where these ceremonies are going to take place. They usually have them on weekends in the evening. There has to be support all the time, and really help them, because a lot of them, they have so much potential. They don't know what to do with what they have. Because a lot of these women, when I'm in Calgary, they talk to me or they phone me, Ruth, how can I, do something? How can I do this and that, whatnot? But that support is so important. It has to be ongoing. I hope I answered your question.
Very good.
That was perfect. And I'll open up the same question to Dr. Voyageur and Stephanie as well. If you think there's maybe kind of one key thing that leaders in Alberta shelters can take away in terms of how changing that style so it is a more welcoming, a more productive space for both Indigenous women that are seeking services and Indigenous women that are providing services in the shelters.
I think that, within the Indigenous community, it's all about relationships. So having, the interest, the time, the initiative to nurture that that relationship, because dealing with issues of trust, you have people who've been traumatized, and you have to, help those people trust again. So, and having respect for difference, and having recognizing the humanity in another person, and knowing that the potential is there, as Ruth said.
And I can go back to what I said earlier on, they shouldn't have had such horrible struggle as they did. They should have had, they should have had. What I was telling the government of Alberta last month is that with their funding, you're dealing with people that are traumatized. You're dealing with people that didn't have a university education. You need to be mindful of the people that you're trying to help. And as if you keep building these obstacles and saying, "Oh, you need this and you need all of this," that doesn't help anybody. You need to be mindful of who you're helping, where they're at. You also need to have your work, the people in your workplace know our history, why we're traumatized, and why we are the way we are. If they have that understanding, then upon their own judgment to where their own moral compass is where they're going to move forward. So if you're a company that is successful and you don't have to worry about funding, find the companies that are struggling for the funding. Find the ones that are struggling the most and go to them, build the relationship. I really think Awutan and Ruth and Josie should be at really at the forefront of all of this, because a lot of the healing lodges are in the south. And just to recognize we need more up here. Change the inside of all the funny stuff, because not everyone in these communities and on these reservations are highly educated, so be respectful of that. There's a reason why they're not, because they're traumatized in the first place. A lot of us can get through that, although some of us can't, though they still want to help and do the work. What a leader really is if you're successful in a pillar, you go down to where there are struggles and you make them successful. If you're a leader and everyone around you is successful as you are, that's a true leader.
Yeah, the leader goes to the people, not the people to the leader.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But if I could just add one more thing.
Please.
There is this idea that Indigenous people are deficit white people. And, we are our own people. We have our own strengths. We have our own beliefs, our own way of doing things and whatnot. And just because they're not the same as yours doesn't mean that they're wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
So, understanding that, we also have a strength-based environment. I mean, X number of years ago, my husband, and actually Ruth, you were there when Brian got his headdress transferred.
Yeah.
And I invited my people from my department to come to witness this ceremony. And some of them had written on Indigenous people, but had never stepped foot on an Indian reserve. And had also, I think there was some trepidation there, some worry about what it's going to be like to go to an Indian reserve.
Yeah.
What am I going to find there? Am I going to be safe? Or, all of those kind of worries that mainstream people have. And speaking just from my experience, that they were really surprised by what they found there. People were happy, everyone's getting along, it's organized, it's clean, it's, we can feed 2,000 people in a couple of hours. I mean, we're pretty organized.
And we laugh a lot.
Yes, and we laugh a lot.
We have so much fun and whatnot.
Yeah, for sure.
And I think that's what keeps us going.
Yeah.
Is our humor.
Mm-hmm.
Well, for myself, that's what kept me going, especially when I was drinking and all that. My humor.
Yeah.
So I really understand what Dr. Voyageur is talking about. Like for me, I'm not a highly educated woman. And, you know, there were so many times I felt like giving up on a Wutan shelter, especially meeting at these communities, different communities in Calgary. They would say, we support you people working on your own shelter, but we have one concern. We don't want drunken men creeping, you know, at nights on our streets looking for their women, whatnot, you know, stuff like that.
Yeah.
There were so many racial remarks, comments made, but deep in here, I felt like crying. I was so upset. I had to keep my composure.
Sure.
And people
Yeah.
just sometimes don't know how insulting they are in
Yeah.
saying these things. I mean, for example, if we look at, you know, the drinking rates, fewer people drink in the Indigenous community than in mainstream society. 1/3 of our population has never touched a drop. But we, you know, have this stereotype of, you know, the thing is that, you know, people that do have problems are very visible.
Yes.
And so, you know, if you realize that you are dealing with people who are traumatized,
Yes.
but those people do not represent our entire community.
Exactly.
Just as, you know, the justice system will never meet the vast majority of the Indigenous community because we're law-abiding citizens,
Yes.
or because we have been fortunate enough to not find ourselves in that position.
Yes.
So, you know, knock down those stereotypes, start seeing situations for what they are,
Yep.
individuals for who they are, and, you know, everybody has a story.
That's right.
Everybody has a story, and realizing that your story is just as valid as my story is just as valid as someone else's story.
Yeah,
That's right.
absolutely. It's really important, like I said, to know the story and know the history of why. And like I said, that person upon their moral compass, well, not everyone's moral compass is aligned. We are still facing racism. We are still facing obstacles. And historically, we have continuously been failed. Continuously. So if you really care, you will keep going and keep working and keep knocking on the door, make offerings, find protocol, go to the community, go to these people on the ground. Very, very important. We will know how much you care by how much you keep bringing to them and keep bringing to us. We will know. Yeah, and just remember why. It's maybe sometimes it takes a little bit more patience, but we are historically continuously failed. So if you just have that understanding and that compassion and moving forward, and you bring that drive as much as we do, because we are very driven people, because we are realizing that we have to do the work ourselves. But it's really nice if someone came in with the right intent and the right moral way. We're all for that.
Well, I think just to leave this conversation here, because we've simply run out of time, but I think what I hear as one of the major messages is that it's all about relationships and the importance of establishing that interpersonal relationship, that personal relationship with the Indigenous women in the shelters, but also within the community as well, and working closely with the community. But also, and I think this is where there's a lot more work to be done, and we have to know more. There has to be more information about that to erase some of these stereotypes that we continuously have to struggle with. And a lot more work needs to be done to support the Indigenous women in these shelters, but also across the society. We need to be able to support our people in a more meaningful way. And so there's a lot more work to be done. But taking you three as good examples and role models and leaders in the many fields that you work in, I really want to take this time to thank you all for being here and sharing your knowledge and your wisdom with us.
Thank you.
Can I just say
Yes,
one more thing?
please.
Those were one of the reasons I wrote my book,
Yes.
to educate, society, and especially our survivors.
Yes.
that they really need to do some healing. They really have to look at themselves, and also for our youth to understand what a survivor went through, what happened. I really had to look at honesty when I was working on the book. It hurt. I did a lot more healing when I was working with my co-author. But then first and foremost was to educate society. What, what we've been through, what we've gone through, and for them to understand. And when we look at those recommendations, 97 recommendations, it says in there that for us to really come out and educate, because they have to understand what we've been through. And that's how come when these recommendations came out, I was so happy. And I really think, start using different mechanism, different books, whatever, even to educate our young people, like in the elementary schools, junior, senior high schools. My little great-granddaughter, we went through the town of Gleason that one day, and she's seen our people drinking, and she said, "Grandma, how come all these people have real weird, different behaviors?"
Yeah.
Like she recognized it at her young age. And I told her, "My girl, there's reasons why you see our people. They're already asking at that young age, about our people, and we need to be educating our young people. So it starts at that level. They grow up with the trauma, what happened to us, and so this way they recognize why we have these problems."
That's wonderful. Thank you for that.
Great, thank you.
Thank you so much. I just want to end on a final note and say thank you so much for sharing your time and knowledge and wisdom. And I hope that this project will help to educate the ACWS membership. And I will be sharing a lot of your work and resources, your book, Elder Ruth, and your resources that you've created as well, Dr. Voyageur, and connections to Stephanie's work with IAW. And I think as a challenge, what I'm taking from this, a challenge for ACWS as an organization and our membership is to also find ways to tell different stories and put out that different vision, because ACWS members see success stories, and so with Indigenous women, and so I think that's the challenge that I'm taking away from this, is really how we can tell those different stories and change that perception and be a small part of that work. So thank you so much for sharing your knowledge, and it was very wonderful to have you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Wonderful. I know we could have went on.
Yeah, oh yeah.
But,
For sure.
but thanks for all that.
Yeah.